Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Jane Georges. I'm Dean of the Hahn School of Nursing and Health Sciences at the University of San Diego. We are getting together today with some nurse friends of mine to do something kind of fun. We're going to talk about fiber arts in nursing. Now, fiber arts, sometimes called textile art, is used interchangeably. It could be anything that you do that involves the manipulation of fiber. It could be crochet, knitting, quilting, needlepoint. Women throughout history have engaged in fiber arts to create things like blankets, clothing, things that humans need to survive. And throughout history, we've used all kinds of fibers from plants, from animals, and now we use a great deal of synthetic fibers also. But I often think that the creation of fiber arts is very interwoven with women's history, but I want to make it clear at the outset of this podcast, it's done by all kinds of people. People who self-identify as male, transgender people. I don't think of fiber arts as a specifically gendered activity, though like nursing, it's been shaped a lot by gender perspectives. I started crocheting 40 years ago. That's 40 years ago in 1980. Crochet has been a good companion to me on my journey as a nurse. For me, it's fulfilled some important needs to decrease stress, but also to be able to connect with other nurses, maybe on a deeper way. Those of you familiar with my scholarly work know that my theoretical work is centered around power relations, the power relations that shape nursing practice. My work looks at the environments in which nurses function, which in the tradition of Foucault, I refer to as biopolitical spaces, both in clinical settings or academia. And I define biopolitical spaces as locations where power is used in social processes. Could be a hospital, could be school, could be a prison, could be home. Anywhere human beings are interacting with each other, there are very likely power relations issues going on among social processes. And I think my own scholarly work has been interwoven with my crochet work, and I'll get to that a little later. I want to show you a scholarly book that's been very helpful to me in my journey as a nurse and as a fiber artist. There's a fair amount of scholarly history around women, creativity, and the fiber arts as forms of resistance. So this is a book I would recommend. It's called Stitching Resistance, Women, Creativity, and Fiber Arts. And the editor's name is Agosin, A-G-O-S-I-N. It was published in 2014. I say it's a scholarly book because it contains some really interesting documentation about how during history, people, both men and women, but particularly women, have been able to express resistance to oppression in a variety of biopolitical contexts. You might be familiar, for example, of the use of quilts by African Americans who participated in the Underground Railroad. Messages for travelers could be hidden in plain sight, as specific quilt motifs had meaning for the viewers who understood the code. Often these quilts were hung in an open window with an encoded message for a viewer who needed help. My belief is that, hey, every environment is a biopolitical environment. Nurses survive by doing what we need to do. So I'm happy to share with you today some of my crochet work and some of my thoughts about my growth as a nurse fiber artist. And while there's no current published documentation that I know of about the use of fiber arts by nurses, it interests me a lot. So I'm very excited that later in this video, you'll get to see some work by some other nurse fiber artists and hear about their work as well as mine. I think our work in the fiber arts is a deep well that contains our experiences as nurses, and I think it remains largely unexplored. So this podcast is the first step in exploring it more. Now, the benefits of engaging in fiber arts, such as crochet, knitting, needlepoint, are well documented. We know that doing this activity on a regular basis can lower stress levels, enhance coping skills. But beyond the obvious psychological benefits, there exist some other human underlying needs, spirituality, the construction of meaning, that also have been reported from these activities. Well, now let's take a look at some of my own crochet work from the past 40 years. And I'm going to reflect on how it's interwoven with what's going on in my life as a nurse and as a spiritual journey too. And I think you'll see how themes like meaning can be intertwined within crochet and nursing. So I want to start by showing you a piece I made in fall 1980. I remember making this like it was yesterday. I made this in the nurses' lounge of the operating room at Moffitt Hospital of the UC San Francisco Medical Center over a series of weekends leading up to Christmas of 1980. And I had just had a huge growth spurt as a nurse and also as a crocheter. I'd only started crocheting a few weeks earlier, but I had successfully completed an evening course in crochet at the old Lee Ward's craft store, if you remember that. But my first and best teachers were other nurses who basically taught me how to do this thing in between trauma surgeries. There were no scheduled breaks or lunches at this job. In the middle of very tough physical work and emotional chaos, some older nurses had taught me that it can be stabilizing to bring a project with you. Why don't you bring a project with you? And my response was, I don't have any projects. And those very fine, kind nurses says, well, we'll teach you. Bring some yarn and a hook in tomorrow and we'll get started. And they did, and I did, and so it began. And so this is the piece I made, finished in December of 1980, and I'm gonna hold it up here. I wanna get it somewhat closer. Yes, it's a doily. I made it for my mom. It used to be in a frame at her house, and I would like to get it framed or stretched again, although I'm kind of enjoying seeing it as a floppy disk in 3 dimensions, where you can see these leaves that are just sort of hanging there in space and overlapping each other like fractals. That was so cool to do that. This was my first time I tried crochet for my own culture, which is Irish crochet. I loved the complexity of the designs and the way that they echoed traditional Celtic designs of swirling recursive lines. And my grandmother had taught me that these Celtic designs represented the interconnectedness of everything in the universe. So I was drawn immediately in my crochet career into doing very detailed work, very detailed doilies, which have those characteristics. Now, doilies were no more in 1980 than they are in 2020. but I felt like they were calling me. I just loved watching the design emerge as the circle went around and around. You start at the center with just a tiny little ring, and every round brings you higher and higher, further out from the center. And a small detail that maybe you make in one row is now going to be the basis for an entirely new motif, like a leaf. You see how this was like a little sunflower is how it started, and then it grew leaves, and then it grew those. That's how it developed. I loved how it reminded me of the stages of biological evolution. And so this was a starting point for me. I probably would have 40,000 crochet pieces in this house if I'd kept everything I'd ever made. I've only kept stuff that means a lot to me, and this doily definitely does. I love color, make no mistake. People who know me know I love purple, I love turquoise, but I think sometimes you need what I call color silence to clear your thoughts and think more about the shape and structure of the design of the doily. I started using just what's called plain cotton crochet thread, which, believe it or not, you could buy for 29 cents at a 5 and dime store close to the medical center. It was cheap. I love the feel of it. And I just decided to stay with that natural cotton and to stay with one color, and that's how this came out in the monochrome design. It has aged, it's gotten a bit yellowed or tanned in the past 40 years, and I kind of like that. I like its aging patina. Those were times in which, as a nurse, I was just trying to figure things out. Our job at UCSF was not easy in those days. I was a per diem nurse in the OR for babies who had congenital heart defects. And on any given weekend, we had 2 or 3 of them. And it was tough because not all of them survived. It was an extremely exact procedure, as you can imagine. It had to be right. And so I think it's probably no wonder that I decided to get extremely perfectionistic, very detailed, very early. The pattern for this, long gone now. I have no idea how I made these leaves float in space, but that was my first real project. Well, as I said, I felt like the doilies were calling me, and I stayed with it, and I stayed with the natural cotton. I like the feel of that cotton in my fingers. I never really liked the feeling of synthetics. And so you get the idea that fiber arts is a very tactile art. It can be very, very sensuous. It has a physical aspect to it. I love the way the cotton feels, gives a little bit. So this is an example of something I made when I was in my PhD program at University of Washington, and it's officially called a pomander. It is stuffed with lavender, and you hang it up in the closet. This is one I made for my sister. And you can see I used the Irish crochet technique of flowers and leaves in 3 dimensions. So it has a nice dimensionality to it. And I just like the swirls, and still smells really good. Well, nurses are a pragmatic group. We are like engineers. We want things to work well. So that pomander comes from a stage of my crocheting where I wanted things to be useful. Okay, it has to do something. It can't just be a doily. It has to do something. So here's something I made in the early 2000s, and I was here at USD. My mom had passed away, and so my sister and I started a tradition of secretly making Easter baskets for each other and then leaving them to surprise each other on Easter morning. I had put off shopping for an Easter basket, went to Vaughn's, went to Ralph's. This was before the time of Amazon. And I just went into a full panic. How am I going to get an Easter basket? Well, I had this old purple ombre yarn at home, and without a pattern, I just said to myself, darn it, I know how to make circular objects. I know how to make tubular objects. I'm going to make an Easter basket. And I did. And it was kind of a lovely surprise. I didn't know that this could be self-striping, but look at the stripes that came out. I did not plan for them. And then again, as kind of a nod to Irish crochet, I put a rose here. Well, I stayed in that same paradigm of making things which are useful for quite a while. I made blankets, shawls, you name it, but they had to serve a purpose. And generally speaking, after I would make something like a shawl, I would give it away to a women's shelter or to people who could use it. So I went through a period of time where I was making a lot of what were called prayer shawls in the 2000s. And then in 2016, when I got cancer, I started considering the creation of beauty for its own sake, just 'cause. I went back to those round motifs of the doilies, and I came to discover that those doilies I was so drawn to are in fact mandalas. Now, a mandala is a round artistic motif that occurs across human cultures. In some faith traditions, they represent the wholeness of the universe. You might have seen round geometric symbols in Hindu art, Buddhist art, but they're really everywhere. Mandalas are certainly in Catholic symbolism, which uses a lot of circular motifs in those gorgeous stained glass windows of the great cathedrals of Europe. And the psychologist Carl Jung described mandalas as a symbol in a dream, representing the dreamer's search for completeness and self-unity. Well, I'm not sure I'm achieving total enlightenment in my mandalas these days, but I'm having a lot of fun exploring them. Jung said that mandalas are the path to the center. And I think we can reach understanding and resolution as we create them. As the circle grows larger and larger, the row you're working on may not look like it makes sense. In fact, it may look like you're getting nowhere, but then you get a little bit further out and the pattern becomes more visible and more beautiful. It's a lot like life. It's a lot like our growth as human beings. So I started looking for mandalas and found them everywhere. A very commonly seen type of mandala these days is what's called the dream catcher, which comes from Native American culture. And this is a dream catcher that I made in the past couple of months during this COVID crisis. A friend of mine who is a Native American nurse shared with me that dream catchers are a very important part of his cultural heritage. And I know that the most common explanation is that they do something, they catch your bad dreams, you hang it up over your bed, they catch your bad dreams in this web while you sleep, so you only have good dreams. But as my friend Roger explained to me, it's important to use the dream catcher to help you catch the good dreams of your tribe. And so I made this dream catcher in the midst of this COVID epidemic. And it's my hope that it catches bad dreams, but mostly it's my hope that it helps me dream good dreams on behalf of our nursing tribe. These nights, I do think a lot about where nursing will be in 20 or 30 years. We are going to survive this crisis. and we are going to thrive from it as a profession. Our tribe of nursing will keep on interweaving our intellects, our passions, and our abilities to save lives and promote health. And so now I'd like to invite some of my nurse friends to show you their work. We have kept this very open. I've invited them to say whatever they'd like to say about their work. And so from these impressions, I hope we can get a pastiche of what nursing fiber arts might look like. What is it about? What are the experiences surrounding them?
So I would like to tell you about this. Through the class I'm teaching, you know, they were worried that there wouldn't be enough things for the students to do. Right. So we got connected to this operation called Operation Gratitude. And it's something that it's for the people who've been in the service that maybe are no longer able to, you know, they're not as mentally alert as they were, and they so appreciate things like, you know, if you write letters to them or if you make things for them. So Nancy and I are busy working on making some of these to send to the people. We're not totally involved in it yet. We're trying to get ourselves more involved, but we do have, we've talked to the people a little bit, and I think so far I've got 3 made and I'm working on number 4. So, but it's just something to do to help these people that have helped us so much to be able, and these are knitted. Now Nancy's is crocheted.
Well, Connie,
so anyhow.
Would you please hold it, maybe take it off your neck, hold it kind of up and close to the camera. Let's all take a look at the great red, white, and blue color. Oh, that's gorgeous knitting. Oh,
yeah. And then I have a red one, of course.
Oh, well, that's really nice.
Yeah, I think they'll really like them. I mean, we don't even know probably who the people are that are going to be receiving them. It'll be through, and then this one I'm not quite finished with. I still have to get the end pieces on, but we're getting them there.
I love the royal blue. Oh, that's so pretty.
So that's what I've been doing. Although I love to knit, it's kind of, we have a knitting group, and of course we haven't had them since March. But that's what we do, is make things at that. That's my story.
That is a beautiful story. I think it shows that no matter where we are in our journey of life as nurses, we're always connected to people we want to take care of.
Right.
Care for. And we want to create beauty also. I think that's a big thing about why nurses get involved in the fiber arts.
Exactly. I think you're so right.
Beauty is very healing.
Yes.
And I can just see some of those veterans really welcoming those beautifully made items.
Right. And it's a California organization, which is kind of nice too. They're up in Chatsworth, California. So whether they'll go just to California or they'll go someplace else, we are not aware of that, but we'll learn more.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my goodness, those are beautiful. And
Thank you.
Nice for people, it feels special to them to have something made by human hands close to them.
Right. So
that's another thing I think we instinctively know as nurses is the power of touch, whether that touch is direct or whether it's sometimes by remote means. And
that's right.
Yeah. So, oh, that's so beautiful.
Yes. Thank you.
Sharing those. Those are nice.
Thanks.
Well, Nancy, does your project tie into that, or is it different, or do you have other projects?
Well, as we've been sitting here listening and talking, mine is getting completed.
See? Lovely.
I'm big into making the granny squares. I probably started when I was 6 years old. Wow. And as anybody who knows me really well knows, I'm not particularly someone that loves to drive a car, but I've had 2 husbands that both love to drive. So I did lots of blanket making as a passenger in the car.
Okay.
And And when Connie and I were talking about the scarf thing, I said, well, I'm going to crochet the squares. So we measured them out so they're the correct proportion. And this one will be done shortly. And then I have another one that the squares are all, excuse me, the squares are all made, but the tomorrow then I'll put it together. And then I've got blue and white to also make scarves. So it's been really fun because I've made blankets. I have 2 blankets. I'm sorry they weren't ready. They were being blocked at the cleaners, or I would have shown them to you, that I've made during this lockdown.
Yeah.
One is a queen size granny square in an off-white. It's a wedding gift to my nephew and his new wife. And that has to be shipped. He's a U.S. Marine, and that has to be shipped to Washington, D.C., where he's assigned. And then I took leftover yarn, and I'll get back to why I have certain types of leftover yarn. I took leftover yarn, and my brother and his wife have bought a new home. And I used colors that would mean something to him from my leftover yarn. And it's more like a throw if you were on the couch and you were watching TV. It's that size. And I apologize that they weren't ready. The stores are open, then they're not open, then they're open. So I couldn't get them.
Life is crazy these days.
But the colors I have left over, I started when I and my siblings were having children, making baby blankets for the newborns. And then when all the newborns, there are 10 of them, went off to college, I made them blankets in their college colors, which is a sort of, and I've made it for friends' children as well. The finding the correct shade of whether it's blue or burgundy or even red, I go to the college bookstore online and seek out the color. And one college, they didn't have very much colorful material or merchandise in their bookstore. So I got in touch with the admission office, and they sent me a sample of their college colors. So I had the correct red for the blanket. And those are the size of a single bed that it would be appropriate in a college dorm. And then for the mothers of these wonderful children that have gone off to their higher education, I use the colors that are representative of the school their children have gone to, and I make them scarves. You just reach over my shoulder here. And this is a square. Can you see? I don't know where the camera is. I mean, can you see that?
Square, beautiful.
This is a square for the grandson's college.
Oh.
This is one of what went into his blanket. But this is
Isn't that beautiful?
This is the scarf for his mom, which is, again, you can see the linkage with the same colors, and it's obviously a much thinner scarf. And he liked it so much that I have, actually the reason I have this one in my hand is because I made him this one, which will be his Christmas present, so that he'll have his alumni colors when he goes sporting about. And
that's great. Let's talk about materials for a minute, including color and type of material. You may have noticed that in my work, I tend to go with the very plain number 10 Aunt Lydia's cotton in natural. And there's kind of a reason for that. I originally bought it because I could afford it. It was only 29 cents at a 5 and dime store in 1980. And I've come to appreciate the feeling of it though. And I've come to appreciate the fact that the lack of color allows for seeing more detail. But don't think I don't love color, because I think color can be very healing. It can, and I love the warm fuzziness of modern synthetic yarns. It just feels so nice. Hey, love wool, love those sheep, but with that said, the synthetics don't itch as much. So that's really wonderful that you went to all that trouble to find that color, that shade of blue.
Well, I don't think of it as trouble because I like it as an adventure. And I really find, as all of us in our knitting group know, that it's just very, very relaxing because you can sit and talk and solve the problems of the world while you're still being productive. So, that's worked out really well. And then I actually keep a binder of who I make blankets for, and, the yarn names and the size needles that I use. I generally use a G crochet hook because it makes the best one, the looser ones that I like. But I just wanted to show you the baby blanket.
Yeah.
Because there's a hidden positive side to making squares like this for a baby blanket. And this obviously represents one of what would be part of the blanket. The babies curl their fingers inside the openings.
I bet they do.
And the feedback from the parents has been absolutely phenomenal. I never even thought of that. And so it kind of becomes their favorite blankie because they can drag it around, hook to their finger, or
Baby
roll it up.
So now we're getting into texture, which is a whole other thing. And only little babies have the wisdom to look for that texture.
But it's really been fun. And I start off with very generic. And then depending on what colors, like for this particular baby, the nursery was going to be these soft, blues and greens and yellow color.
I love that.
And then I had another mother. I only have the yarn here. I think you can see it by there. It was for a boy, and it's the off-white, 2 shades of blue and a tan, because the theme in his nursery was going to be the sea and the jungle. And so she wanted things that represented the earth and the water and things like that. So that was kind of fun to shop for that yarn as well. But like you, I'm really much more into the acrylics than I was when I started out very many years ago at age 6. So, but
well, and the acrylics in those days felt pretty stiff and unyielding.
Exactly, very scratchy, I believe.
And now they're marvelous. Connie, I know you're going to have to excuse yourself. Do you have anything to say about types of yarn you like and colors you like?
Well, I like pretty much the bright colors and things like that. That's what I like. But I go to all kinds of yarn. I go and see what's on sale usually. That's my main thing. And I get, I don't use much wool because I think for some reason it makes me sneeze and things like that. So I stay away from the wool. But otherwise I'll go to almost cotton. I love cotton. And so there's just so many things out there.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I know you might have to step away.
I do have to, but thank you for having me. And I'm going to try and see if I can turn. Oh, I can do the leave. So I'm going to go ahead and do the leave. Thank you. The rest of you have a good night, and I will see you later. Okay?
Thank you so much for participating. Okay.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Well, our last, but certainly not least, let's turn to Dr. Semino-Asaro, because she is a crocheter extraordinaire, and she is the person who has most actively got me using crochet as a coping mechanism during this COVID crisis. And it's been a pretty effective therapeutic, I have to say. Semira, tell us, but first of all, tell us, what is that beautiful poncho you have on, or is it a shawl? It's in lovely colors.
Poncho. It's just kind of a open stitch poncho, crocheted with a Lion Brand shawl and a ball.
Oh yeah.
So the colors are already there. I don't have to think about the colors; they just emerge of their own. And this one I picked because I was thinking about Dean George's love for sunflowers, and I was thinking about sunrises and sunsets, and I thought, okay, I'm going to wear this one today because we both love sunflowers, and I love these colors that have anything to do with sunflowers too. But this whole little gathering means a lot to me. I really appreciate that that we're doing this, because I've given some thought to what has it meant to me, the crochet journey, that I've been on. And I do think that looking back at, the time that I learned as a child up until now, it has connected me to important women in my life. And so this is actually an extension of that, a connectedness that I feel. Even though I'm crocheting most of the time in solitude, I don't have like a group that I
don't either anymore, although I really want to come to the group which meets on Wednesday evening.
Oh, well, we'll let you know when it starts up again.
With Mary Jo, when it starts up. I'm sorry, Semira, go ahead. Yeah, I'm in solitude also.
even a group on Zoom probably during this pandemic wouldn't be such a bad idea, you know, to crochet and talk. Even I did that actually once with my cousins. We did a Zoom and they knit and I crocheted while we talked. But that's the closest I've gotten to being in a group. But I think, you know, it was, for me, you know, it has a very deep, it's a very deep experience, crocheting. It's, you know, when I think about when I learned it, I had kind of a non-traditional childhood. So my parents and I immigrated from Iran when I was about going on 6 years old to America, and they got divorced shortly after. And I went to boarding school, which in our culture is not that strange to send your child to boarding school at 4th grade. But I know
in Catholic culture, it used to be not that unusual too. I get it. Yep.
Yeah, like the book Madeline. But there were no witches or warlocks. It wasn't a Harry Potter sort of situation. It was just a small boarding school with 12 girls, and then we had a co-ed situation in the daytime. But I was there for 5 years, from the age of 9 on. And that's where I learned to do a lot of things that I wouldn't have otherwise learned to do, because I was an only child and a single mom, and both my parents were residents. They had gone to medical school in Iran and came here to do their residency, and they were on call every 3rd night. So that was one of their decisions when they got divorced, that I needed some stability. And so in that boarding school, I learned how to crochet, I learned how to play jacks, I learned how to do cartwheels. I learned how to do things that as a single, like only child, I doubt I would have learned. And so the person who taught me, I'm still friends with, you know,
Oh, goodness.
like 45 years later, we're still connected. She taught me at age 9, and I have memories of going to Woolworths on a Saturday, and they would give us a little spending money. And my friend Debbie and I would run into Woolworths and immediately go to the yarn section and pick out some yarn and a, you know, hook. We go home and we roll the skein into a ball. And then basically we would make granny squares. And so for years and years, this is my little friend here.
Oh, that's cute.
For years and years, that's all I ever knew how to do, because I learned at such a young age. And then, you know, once I got to high school, I really didn't do much crocheting. And my early, you know, career as a nurse, I kind of I did some crafting here and there, a little sewing here and there, but I kind of let it go. And then, of course, I had my 3 sons and, you know, a lot of multitasking going on. And it really wasn't a big part of my life. But in 2017, I had, you know, the beginning of what has been a few rough years. Yeah, the 2017 started with January with my losing my cat to lymphoma, my sweet little kitty. That was January. In June, not that these things are equivalent, but in June, my mother passed away after a very long, protracted illness, and in a very sudden, sort of traumatic way. And then the December of that year, I needed myself a radical hysterectomy, not for any major serious reason, but for a condition. And it was at that point when the doctor told me, you need to be active, but you also need to rest. And I'm not good at doing that.
Well, what a wise physician, because how many physicians, not nurse practitioners, but physicians would be wise enough to say, you need to rest more.
Yeah, and you know, I'm not good about like sitting and just watching television, or, you know, I'll sit and read for a while, but I just needed to do something with my hands. So I ended up at Joann's, and I thought, let me see what I can do. You know, I picked up a skein of yarn and needle, not even sure I'd remember how to do a basic granny. And I put on YouTube, I found some tutorials on basic grannies, and it came back. It was like body memory. It just came back. I couldn't believe it because
Isn't it something, the movement of the hands and the cognitive ability to do that, it's more than a muscle memory. It's deep in your cortex, I think.
It was amazing. I couldn't believe it. You know, just like, well, they say like riding a bike, right? You haven't ridden a bike in 10 years, you get on there, you start. And I was so pleased. So one of the very first things I made in 2017 was a granny square blanket, because it reminded me of something I had made it, you know, when I was young. And it's just your basic kind of big granny. And I picked these colors because they're my son's favorite colors, green, blue, and this like dark shade of red or maroon. And so in 2017, this blanket got me sort of back into the full thing. And once that happened, honestly, it was like an addiction. I went a little nuts. I went and spent way too much money on yarn.
There's nothing wrong with that. We need our stash in our house in case a COVID pandemic comes. See, we were ready.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
And you know, it's kind of like, I go on YouTube, I see a project, I get so excited, and I think, oh, the yarn I have isn't quite right for this. I'm going to need to get some yarn. Whereas, I mean, realistically, I could use what I have, but so that's been a little bit of a struggle keeping that in check. But you're right. During the pandemic, it's been nice to have a variety. I can literally go shopping in my own closet for yarn.
Me too.
I think all of us can.
Yeah. And so anyway, so blankets turned to wearables, because I had never done wearables as a child. I attempted a couple, but I never really finished one. And ponchos I find to be very meditative, almost like a granny. It's a very repetitive sort of circular thing that kind of just gets bigger and bigger. And when I'm in that space, when I'm crocheting, you know, thoughts come and thoughts go. Some of them that are uncomfortable or difficult, or, you know, just memories and things. And it feels just like a mindfulness or meditative exercise to me, because as I'm counting stitches or as I'm involved in that, I can engage that thought, but it's like I can put it on a rock and watch it go down the stream. I don't get overly impacted. You know, I'm able to remain somewhat detached. So I feel like when I have memories of what happened with my mom, and now my husband is struggling with cancer, I can be with the discomfort, but the crochet gives me such a sense of centeredness and comfort, even though I'm engaging these other things that are going on with me. So it's helped with any sorts of anxiety that I've had, and any feelings that, you know, of sadness and, you know, just difficulty and loss. And it's been actually a lifesaver. It means that much to me. And my more recent, funny you mentioned mandalas, or kindred spirits. And my more recent projects have been, you know, some mandalas like this. And I wasn't using a lot of fine materials until more recently. This is like a number 2. I usually stay with like a 4-plot, you know, or but this is like a 3.5 hook and a 2-ply yarn, and I'm able to, you know, to do that now better than, you know, I did before. This is my more recent mandala.
Oh, you sent me a text. That one is beautiful. It is like the rising sun. It's gorgeous. It's nice.
Yeah. Like I said, these colors remind me of.
That is so pretty. Oh, that's so nice.
Thank you.
What was the first color? The way the lighting in your room is, the first color it was less clear. Was it a blue? The softer one you had before that, was it a blue color or a white?
This one, yeah, this one is Red Heart. Makes this really beautiful yarn. It's called It's a Wrap Rainbow.
Oh, now that I can see the edge, yeah, I've got a glare on my computer here with the sun in the afternoon, but that is just beautiful. I
Thank you.
really like that.
It's an amazing ball of yarn. In the past, it would intimidate me because, again, it's such a fine thread. But out of this one skein, I was able to make this mandala, and then I'm working on this shawl. These are the rest of the colors that are coming out
Oh,
of
that's
that one
beautiful.
ball
Oh,
of yarn.
look at that. That's beautiful.
This is called Fiesta is the color way on this.
Yeah.
So, I'm having more fun with the thinner yarns now than I did
That's
before.
interesting. I've never tried the thinner yarn. That would make me want to do that because it just looks like it would be so useful to just use as a light wrap. And the colors are beautiful.
The color changes are super subtle. They change very subtly.
But it's all within the yarn. You don't change them.
Right.
Yeah. Oh no, I don't have to do anything. It's great.
Oh,
the
you do a lot. You just don't tie yarn.
The color changes that are built into these cakes of yarn, as they call them these days, that Lion Brand Yarns makes and Coats and Clarks, they're incredible.
Oh, I know.
You don't have to change the color.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
fun. Yeah. So sometimes it's like large projects. Sometimes it's small projects. It just depends on my mood, in terms of what I want to see something to completion or I want something to keep
Keep you going. Yeah.
But it's definitely a feeling of being connected to the past, to friends, to other women who are doing this. It just feels like a much larger experience than meets the eye. Yeah.
It really does. And I think for me, the idea that, I mean, I see in no uncertain terms, look at the, not too perfectionistic, huh, Jane? What I was doing in 1980, my vision of nursing in those days was not really health promotion. We hadn't been taught health promotion. We had been taught to do interventions to save lives. And so I was at a job in which we were, essentially trying to save the lives of babies in the operating room who had been born with congenital heart defects. And I'm thinking of the months leading up to that Christmas 1980, I was learning those techniques and there was no room for error. It was a big deal.
Right.
And so it makes sense that in my world in those days, the fineness and just, I think maybe the wanting to give something to my mom really nice, of course. But with that said, I've become more open over the years. I'm thinking about, they have these kind of giant yarns now that you almost have to use a broomstick size hook to make big wall hangings. And I'm like, I'd go there. I'd do that. It's funny how we grow in our ability to think about what color and what yarn material would be suitable.
Yeah, it's definitely like an evolution, and you can see yourself opening up certain, being open to certain new things over time. Yeah, but both do beautiful work, and Connie too.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's funny because over the years, so many of us, I think, have drifted in and out of other needle work, whether it's needle point or crewel, counted cross stitch. And I even, for probably a year and a half, I did weaving. We had a friend that had a big loom in their house, and that was wonderful. I was ready to commit one room of my house to have a loom. Weaving is absolutely wonderful.
Oh, don't tempt me.
I know. I don't have the big room net for a loom, but it just, I think weaving is, it's like a hidden secret because there are not that many people. Obviously, you're not walking around like I am sewing yarn together.
I agree, because for me, the ability to make a fabric almost feels magical. And the idea you could be at a loom and make a gorgeous fabric.
Oh, it was just very satisfying. It was. And I think part of what, at least what I experienced, you learn so much about when that all began, not when it began in my life, when it all began, why they did it, where the, all of the yarn came from, how they made. It was just fabulous. And it wasn't a class. It was, you know, a friend had the ability. I think she might have given classes, but it was, you know, more like my coming over to your place, Jane, and we were weaving, you know, that I mean, it was that kind of a, you know, a nice friendship. But it was just, I sometimes regret that I didn't pursue it longer. Keep my little handcrafts so when I'm in the car, but do something like that. And similar to what was just said, you kind of, you lose yourself in it. And it's very meditative. Well, most crafts are. I'm not a television watcher, so if I'm working on a craft, I have my classical music in the background and I'm just happy as can be. Because you could process things, you can, as was said, you know, float them down the river, and when they're out and they're done. I think it's great. I don't know what a lot of people do for stress, but I'm not terribly stressed, but I'm also not the least bit bored. So it really works that way.
I was saying yesterday how I think I'm drawn to the round designs because sort of every row takes you to a new place. And you think, why the heck am I starting to do this now? That doesn't fit with anything that's gone before. That's because it's the start of a brand new motif. We just don't know yet. And I think that's how our lives go sometimes. We don't know why things happen. And then we come to realize, oh, that makes sense. I can understand that. I can integrate it into my life story. And there's something about, for me, going around and around and around, still another time, that is very healing to me.
Yeah, it's the right word. Yeah, healing for sure.
Well,
this has actually been awesome. I wish we should do more of this. We could sit and chat and learn more about each other and play with our yarns and whatever.
And we should. Of course, you know, having my nurse scholar cap on, I'm like, I must write an article about this immediately. All you guys as co-authors, of course. But taking that academician cap off, it's like, you know what, we should just do this. We should get together and crochet or whatever we're doing.
Definitely. And you know, it's interesting. I don't know if I told you this story, Jane, but I was at a conference. I think it must have been when it was in San Diego a couple of years ago, remember? And I was on a break in one of the little break rooms, and I had my crochet with me, and I was just sitting for a moment. And one of the gals who was representing NINR division of like community participatory research or whatever, she came up and said, oh, what are you working on? I had just been to her session. And I said, I'm just crocheting, you know, it's really helped me with my grief, my mom. And I kind of opened up to her and she said, you know, my mom passed away too. And I've taken up crochet and I feel like it's very therapeutic. And I said, you know, I've been wanting to do a study on this. And she said, by all means, write a proposal.
Wow, maybe NINR will fund us someday.
You know, even if it, you know, just to interview women about, you know, what does it mean to you? Does it help you with your anxiety? You know, and how do you, like you were saying, Nancy, is it a stress outlet? How do you deal with stress? Is this one of the ways that you help? Because a lot of women, especially if they're pregnant or they're breastfeeding, they don't want to take medication if they have like mild depression or even bordering on moderate depression. They want other ways of dealing with stress.
Sure. And older women like me who live alone and are now self-isolating, I mean, to me, it's been a lifesaver too. It's almost like the voice of sanity in my life, because as I go around and something new happens in the instructions, and I'm like, well, that doesn't seem right. I'm like, well, it's what it says, so we're going to keep doing it. And then 3 rows later, you're like, holy cow, that's really pretty. I get it.
It's a good thing I didn't deviate from the instructions, right?
Well, that's the thing. Yeah. So anything else either of you would like to share?
Well, I just think it would be lovely to do this more often. Get together, see people. Because truly, when this is, you know, when we finish probably a few minutes, I'll feel like I had gone somewhere and spent time with friends. And I didn't leave the house.